The door slammed shut with a sound that echoed like final judgment. It was March 12, 2009, and Malcolm Raines was inmate number 781,442. Just another face in the lineup at Louisiana State Penitentiary, better known as Angola, the largest maximum security prison in the United States. A former plantation-turned-correctional hellhole, 18,000 acres of concrete, barbed wire, and men with no future. Malcolm was 24, convicted of second-degree murder, 15 years. He didn't kill anyone. The trial had been short, fast, efficient, the prosecutor called it. The jury deliberated less than an hour. Malcolm's public defender fell asleep during closing arguments. Literally. And nobody gave a damn. Young black man. Caught near the scene. No alibi. Case closed. He remembered how his mother screamed when the verdict was read. The sound left a crack in his bones that never quite healed. The first night in Angola, Malcolm didn't sleep. His cellmate, a grizzled man they called Brick, sat on the bottom bunk sharpening a toothbrush into something that didn't look like dental care. Brick looked up and said, "You'll want to learn to disappear." Malcolm didn't understand then, but he would. Year one was survival. Keep your head down. Don't owe nobody nothing. Don't look anyone in the eye too long. There were fights in the yard that left men paralyzed. Guards that smiled while they broke ribs. Whole months would go by without seeing the sky. Malcolm started reading. Anything he could get. Law books, mostly. He didn't know why, maybe because somewhere deep inside, he refused to let the system define his story. He remembered what his high school teacher once told him: if you can read their language, you can fight their war. So Malcolm read, learned, memorized his own trial transcript. It didn't add up. Witnesses contradicted each other. The prosecution hid evidence. He even found out that the lead detective, the one who testified under oath, had a history of misconduct. But nobody outside was listening. And inside, truth wasn't currency. Power was. Then came a letter. 5 years into his sentence, Malcolm got a letter from someone named Emily Cho, a young law student from UCLA working with a nonprofit called Freedom First. She wrote, "I read your case. You've been buried, but I'm not scared of dirt." She asked for permission to dig. Malcolm almost didn't respond. He'd been disappointed too many times. Promises came and went in prison like summer rain, loud, wet, and useless. But something in her handwriting felt alive, like she meant it. So he wrote back. They exchanged letters for 6 months. Emily drove down to Angola that December. She was 26, sharp-eyed and stubborn, carried a box full of files and a recorder like she'd been preparing for war. Their first meeting was awkward. Malcolm didn't know how to talk anymore. Not like a man. Anyway, not like someone whose words weren't monitored, timed, judged. Emily said, "You're not broken. You're buried. I can help." And for the first time in 5 years, Malcolm believed someone. But belief doesn't get you out of prison. What followed was a brutal, painstaking process of petitions, affidavits, and court delays. The judge who sentenced Malcolm had retired. The lead detective had mysteriously vanished. Witnesses had foggy memories. One even recanted, but later disappeared entirely. Rumor said he moved to Mexico. Nobody checked. Emily hit wall after wall, and Malcolm waited. By 2021, 12 years into his sentence, Malcolm had aged like stone. Quiet, hard, focused. But one day, a guard came to his cell and said, "You got visitors. 2 of them." Emily walked in with a new lawyer, a civil rights attorney from D.C. They had something in their eyes Malcolm hadn't seen in a long time. Fire. Emily said, "We found it. The body cam footage, the one they said didn't exist." Malcolm just stared. Emily added, "It proves you weren't there. It proves they lied. But the system doesn't say sorry that easy." It took another year, another hearing, another fight. Malcolm stood before a new judge in March 2022, 13 years after he was locked away, and heard the words, "Conviction vacated. Mr. Raines, you're free to go." Freedom didn't feel real. It felt like the pause between heartbeats, like standing at the edge of a cliff with no ground underneath. Outside the gates, Emily waited with a jacket and a small duffel bag. Malcolm stepped into the sunlight like it was foreign air. He looked around and said, almost in a whisper, "Now what?" March 10th, 2022. After 13 years, 2 months, and 28 days, Malcolm Raines walked out of Angola prison with a cardboard box in one hand and nothing in the other. Inside the box, a pair of cheap state-issued jeans, a prison-creased birth certificate, one faded, photo of his mother now dead for years, and a social security card with a corner torn off. No phone, no ID, no job, no family waiting. Emily drove him to Baton Rouge. She'd booked him a bed at a halfway house. Not the worst kind, but far from home. Not that Malcolm even knew where home was anymore. The first night, he lay on a narrow cot with his shoes still on, staring at a water-stained ceiling and wondering if freedom was just another kind of sentence. He hadn't slept with the lights off. In over a decade, darkness had rules in prison. But out here, the silence was louder. The next morning, he stepped outside and looked around like a man trying to read a foreign language. Everything was different, louder, faster, colder. A bus hissed by. An old man cursed into a Bluetooth headset. A group of teenagers laughed too loud near a liquor store. Malcolm kept walking. Emily had given him a prepaid phone, a Metro card, and a list of shelters and job centers. But no one prepared him for the looks. People saw him, then didn't. Or worse, they looked through him. At the job center, the woman at the desk smiled politely when she saw formerly incarcerated. On the form, "We'll call if anything comes up," she said, already turning to the next person. At the DMV, he waited for hours only to be told he needed proof of residence. "I just got out," he said. The man behind the counter raised an eyebrow. "That's not an address." That afternoon, Malcolm found himself sitting on a bench downtown, holding a ham sandwich Emily packed for him, but unable to eat it. Hunger wasn't the issue. Shame was. He was 37, and starting life like a teenager without a map. The halfway house had rules. Curfew at 9, chores every day, mandatory group therapy twice a week. His roommate, Darnell, had done 8 years for drug possession. "You think getting out is the end of it," he said, picking at his fingernail. "But it's really the start of a whole nother hustle." Malcolm nodded, but he didn't really hear him. His mind was stuck on the gap between innocent and free. One cleared your name, the other gave you nothing back. On day 5, Emily came by with news. "There's a reporter from the Advocate who wants to interview you," she said. "Could be good, get your story out there." Malcolm looked at her like she'd spoken in code. "I don't want people knowing me as the guy who got out. I want them to know I shouldn't have been in." Emily sighed. "That's the same story." Malcolm, just louder. That night, Malcolm finally opened the photo of his mother. It had a crease down the middle and a coffee stain in one corner. But her eyes were still soft. "Still proud," he whispered. "I'm sorry you didn't see me walk out." Then he placed the photo on the nightstand like it was a monument. A week later, he got a call. Not a job. Not the DMV, the prison. A guard named Vincent. The only one who ever treated him like a person. "You heard about Jamal?" The voice crackled. Malcolm froze. "No, he's dead." "Odd. Couple nights ago. Found him in the laundry room." Malcolm sat down. Jamal had done 7 years before parole. They used to share books and trade ramen for coffee. He was going to go to culinary school. He was clean, Malcolm said quietly. "Not anymore." Vincent replied, "That place don't let go easy, Mal." After the call, Malcolm walked for hours. No destination, just pavement and pain. He ended up at the riverfront, where the Mississippi rolled dark and slow like it was carrying the weight of everything unsaid. He stared into the water and thought, "I'm not done. Not until they say my name and mean justice. Not just survivor." The camera made him nervous. It wasn't the lens. It was the stillness, the quiet right before a stranger asked you to bleed into a microphone. Emily sat next to him in the small office of the Advocate, Baton Rouge's oldest newspaper. The reporter, a clean-cut guy named Jonah Lee, had set up a light, adjusted the focus, and said, "Just talk like you're telling your story to a friend." But Malcolm hadn't had a friend in 13 years. He nodded anyway. The red light blinked on. Jonah's voice was soft. "What's the first thing you remember after being sentenced?" Malcolm took a long breath, my mother crying, then the cuffs, then silence. He looked straight into the camera, not blinking. I didn't kill anyone, but they needed someone to blame, and I looked the part. Jonah leaned forward. And what do you want people to understand most? Malcolm didn't hesitate. That freedom isn't forgiveness, and prison doesn't end when the door opens. The interview ran online the next day under the headline, Innocent, Forgotten, and Free, the story of Malcolm Raines. It spread faster than anyone expected. Comments flooded in. This man deserves millions. Shame on the justice system. What if he did do it? Though, how do we know he's telling the truth? They all say they're innocent. By nightfall, Malcolm's name was trending in Louisiana. By morning, CNN called Emily. The attention felt strange. He walked into a coffee shop and someone said, "Hey, you that guy from the article?" Malcolm nodded. "Crazy man, glad you're out." The barista gave him a free drink. No one asked if he had a job. They just wanted the story. Emily suggested starting a GoFundMe. You've got people asking how they can help. You need support. This is what it's for. Malcolm hesitated. He didn't want pity. He wanted a life, still. He agreed. They titled it, Help Malcolm Raines Rebuild His Life, in 3 days. It raised $38,000, and in 3 days, the hate came too. Scam artist. Typical sob story. What about the victim's family? He's just capitalizing on guilt. Someone posted his old mugshot on Facebook with the caption, "Would you trust this man with your kids?" Malcolm read every comment. Everyone, even the good ones, felt like a punch wrapped in flowers. He stopped checking his phone for a while. Then came the invitation. Emily called, almost breathless. The Innocence Project wants to feature you at their national summit in D.C. Malcolm blinked. Why? Because your case shows everything wrong with the system, and because you can speak for the ones who can't. He didn't say yes right away. He'd spent his whole life being talked over. Now, everyone wanted him to speak. He flew for the first time in his life that weekend, sat by the window, looked down at clouds like they were stories waiting to be told. At the summit, the ballroom was packed, lawyers, journalists, exonerees, activists. When Malcolm walked on stage, they clapped, not like a performance, like a recognition. He stepped to the mic. The lights were hot. The room was quiet. He spoke slow. I spent 13 years in prison for something I didn't do. I lost my mother, my 20s, my name. And when I got out, the world didn't know what to do with me. He paused. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be a man who got his life back. After the speech, a woman approached him in tears. Her son had been inside for 8 years. She hugged Malcolm like he was a prophet. And that night, in his hotel room, Malcolm cried for the first time in years, not because he was sad, but because he finally saw himself outside of survival. The next morning, Emily showed him a news headline, State to reopen investigation into Malcolm Raines' conviction. They're scared, she said with a smile. Malcolm just nodded. They should be. April 4th, 2022. Malcolm Raines sat in the back of a courtroom he never thought he'd see again, this time not as a defendant, but as a living contradiction. A free man still fighting a ghost of guilt. The Louisiana Court of Appeals had agreed to reopen the investigation, not because they wanted to, because the public demanded it. The pressure was too loud, the truth too close. But courts don't like to admit mistakes, and neither do the people who made them. The same judge who denied Malcolm's first appeal in 2012 was now presiding again. Judge Harold Griggs, mid-60s, frown lines carved into stone, the kind of man who believed the system only worked if people believed it worked. Now he had to re-examine one of his own rulings. Griggs looked at Malcolm once during the opening session, not with apology, with annoyance. Like a leak in his roof had started dripping again. Emily sat beside Malcolm at the long wooden bench. She whispered, "Stay calm. They'll try to rattle you." Malcolm nodded, but his fingers clenched tight under the table. Across the room sat Assistant DA Kara Templeton. Young, smart, polished. A rising star in the office and someone who clearly didn't like having to clean up someone else's mess. "We're here," she began, "not because of injustice, but because of noise. Internet noise. Public pressure. But let's not mistake volume for evidence. Malcolm stared at her. He didn't hate her. He hated how casual she sounded about a cage. But Emily came prepared. She presented the newly uncovered body cam footage from the original arresting officer, time-stamped, geotagged. It clearly showed Malcolm wasn't at the scene during the time of the murder. It showed another man, unidentified, nervous, wearing the same color hoodie the key witness had claimed Malcolm was wearing. It had been lost in evidence storage for 13 years, a technical error, they claimed. Malcolm called it when it was buried. Over the next week, Emily and her co-counsel, Daniel Brooks, dismantled the original trial piece by piece. The eyewitness had been high. At the time of the murder, the key forensic evidence had been mishandled and later destroyed. The detective who led the arrest, Detective Loring, had been fired in 2015 for falsifying reports into other cases. Templeton tried to downplay it. These are unfortunate procedural errors, but not proof of innocence. Malcolm stood up, his voice steady, but sharp. I was not there. You had proof I wasn't, and you locked me up anyway. The judge banged his gavel. Sit down, Mr. Raines. But Malcolm didn't. 13 years, Your Honor. I'll sit when the truth does. Outside the courthouse, media waited. Malcolm didn't speak to them, not yet. He wasn't interested in sound bites. He wanted something permanent. Emily said, they're not just trying to win. They're trying to protect the illusion. He nodded. And I'm here to burn it. By the second week, things turned ugly. An anonymous email leaked to a local blog claimed that Malcolm had joined a prison gang in 2014, that he had assaulted another inmate, that he wasn't the victim people believed. Emily was furious. There's no record of that. None. They're trying to poison the public. Malcolm didn't flinch. They're scared. That means we're getting close. Still, the damage was done. Talk shows picked it up. Hashtags turned from #justice for Malcolm to #Raines. His GoFundMe lost $6,000 in 24 hours. Someone spray-painted murderer on the wall near his halfway house. That night, Malcolm sat in bed and thought about how truth never travels fast enough. He stared at the ceiling and whispered to himself, I survived Angola. I'll survive this. But he wasn't sure if surviving was enough anymore. Then came the turning point. An elderly woman showed up at the courthouse during recess. She walked straight to Emily and said, I think I know who that man on the footage is. She introduced herself as Patricia Langley, former nurse, retired now. Her grandson, Kyle, had confessed to her that he'd been at the scene that night, that he ran, that someone else got caught. He was scared. He said the guy didn't even see it coming. He never meant to kill him, just a robbery gone wrong. Emily asked, why didn't you say anything before? The woman trembled. He begged me not to. And then I saw the interview. I saw Malcolm. I couldn't sleep after that. A subpoena was issued. Kyle Langley was arrested the next day. Under questioning, he cracked. Said he was drunk, broke, desperate. Thought Malcolm wouldn't go down for it because he didn't match the sketch. The courtroom buzzed when it was read aloud. Malcolm sat still. No anger. No satisfaction. Just the quiet grief of truth arriving too late. On May 3rd, Judge Griggs issued a formal statement. The court finds that the conviction of Malcolm Raines was obtained through a combination of prosecutorial oversight, investigative failure, and suppressed evidence. The case is dismissed with prejudice. Mr. Raines is exonerated, not released, not freed, exonerated. It hit different. It meant they were wrong. After the hearing, a reporter shoved a mic in his face. What now, Mr. Raines? What will you do next? Malcolm looked into the lens, not with fear, but with fire. I'm gonna build something. Not just for me, for the ones still inside. The ones who never got their second chance. He paused. And for the ones who never will. They threw a party for him. At Emily's house. Balloons, food, people clapping like he'd won a game. Malcolm smiled, ate cake, said thank you. But his mind was somewhere else. He kept hearing the metal door slam shut in his dreams, kept checking over his shoulder when he crossed the street. Because free was not a switch, it was a process. 2 weeks after the court dismissed his case, Malcolm was still waking up at 5 a.m. Old habits die hard. He'd sit on the edge of the bed, waiting for a voice to tell him what to do next, but the only sound was the fan in the corner. He made coffee black cheap strong, sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through job listings. No one wanted to hire a man who hadn't touched a computer since 2009. He wasn't angry, just lost. Emily called one morning. There's a law school in New Orleans doing a speaker series on wrongful convictions. They want you. Malcolm laughed. You sure they don't want some Harvard kid with clean shoes? They want you because you're real. He spoke to a crowd of 200 students, told them what it felt like to be forgotten, what solitary confinement does to your sense of time, how it took him a year to sleep with the lights off again. One kid asked, if you could change one thing about the system, what would it be? Malcolm paused. Accountability. He waited a beat. If a doctor messes up, there's a review board, a license, consequences. If a cop messes up, if ADA buries evidence, people die and no one gets fired. The room went quiet. Then came the applause. Not polite fears, like something had cracked open. That night, the law school's dean pulled him aside. You ever thought about advocacy? You'd be a powerful voice. Malcolm shrugged. I barely know how to use Microsoft Word. The dean smiled. We can teach you that part. 3 months later, Malcolm started working part-time at the Southern Justice Initiative, a small legal nonprofit based in Baton Rouge. His job, community outreach, public speaking, and helping families navigate reentry. He sat in circles with mothers whose sons were still inside, talked with teenagers on probation, met with parole officers and state reps. He learned the language of policy, learned the patience of systems, learned that justice wasn't a courtroom, it was a fight in 10 directions at once. But not everyone was happy to see him rise. An anonymous Twitter account posted, "Why is Malcolm Raines pretending to be a hero when he couldn't even hold down a job before prison?" Another tweet, "Not every exoneree is innocent. Just saying." And then came the email, no name, no signature, just a sentence, "You should have stayed in that cell." He showed it to Emily. She said, "They're scared of what you represent. That's power." He nodded, but part of him still slept with a baseball bat under the bed. 6 months after his exoneration, Malcolm stood at a rally on the Capitol steps in Baton Rouge. Hundreds had gathered. The state legislature was considering a bill that would make it easier to access post-conviction DNA testing, something that could have freed Malcolm 10 years earlier. He took the mic. "My name is Malcolm Raines. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a politician. I'm just a man who got a second chance. And I'm here because I want to make sure other people get theirs before it's too late." He looked out at the crowd. "At my trial, the prosecutor said I was just another name in a file. I'm here to say I'm not, and neither is anyone else still buried in this system." Cheers broke out. And for the first time, Malcolm felt like he belonged somewhere. That night, a mother named Denise approached him. Her son, Terrence, had been inside for 11 years. She said, "You gave me hope. I haven't felt that in a long time." He looked her in the eye. "We're going to get him out." He didn't say it like a dream. He said it like a plan. Later that week, Malcolm sat alone in his small apartment. No more halfway house. No more roommates. Just a laptop, some books, and a bulletin board with names, dates, and case numbers. He stared at it like it was a war map, because in a way, it was. And this time, he wasn't fighting for his own name. October 2022, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Malcolm walked into the Department of Corrections building with a stack of documents under his arm. Clean shirt, fresh haircut, eyes sharp. He wasn't there to beg. He was there to expose. Emily had gotten him a meeting with a mid-level Administrator Dale Crenshaw, 30 years in the system, tight, smile to thin. They shook hands like boxers touching gloves before a match. "Mr. Raines," Crenshaw said, "I understand you have concerns." Malcolm placed the documents on the desk. "These are 22 inmates from Angola whose convictions involved Detective Loring, the same detective who arrested me. All of them had inconsistencies in their files, missing evidence, changed witness statements." Crenshaw didn't even flinch. Do you know how many complaints we get like this every week? Malcolm leaned forward. Do you know how many of those end with a man doing 13 years for a crime he didn't commit? Crenshaw shifted in his chair. Look, Mr. Raines, I sympathize. I really do. But what you're asking is a resource problem. Reopening these cases requires legal labor we don't have, funding we don't get. Malcolm held up a file. This man's trial transcript is missing from State Archives. Crenshaw blinked. It's just gone, Malcolm said. No one knows where it went. Still no reaction. That's when Malcolm understood. This wasn't neglect, it was design. They didn't lose the truth, they buried it. Later that week, Malcolm met with Denise again. They sat outside a gas station in her old Honda Civic. She handed him an envelope. Inside were handwritten letters from her son, Terrence, dated back to 2013. I think the guards used to throw some of them away. This is all I have. Malcolm flipped through pages covered in tight, desperate handwriting. One line stood out. I saw something I shouldn't have. I think they're trying to shut me up. Malcolm looked up. Do you know what he meant? Denise shook her head. He never said more. He called Emily. I need access to Angola's internal incident logs from 2013. She sighed. That's not public information. Can we subpoena it? Not without a formal petition. And they'll fight it. He was quiet a moment. Then, let's fight. By December, things got tense. Anonymous voicemails started showing up at the Southern Justice Initiative. One said, stop digging. Another, you think prison was bad. Wait until you cross the people who run it. They called the police. No investigation. Just a shrug. These things happen, the officer said. Malcolm spoke at another panel, this time in front of a Senate subcommittee. Reviewing criminal justice procedures. He told them about Terrence. Told them about the vanished trial records. The ignored letters. The threats. One senator, an older man from Mississippi, leaned into the mic. You seem very confident, Mr. Raines. But let me ask you something. How do you know you're not just seeing ghosts in the system? Where there's only dust. Malcolm looked him dead in the eye. Because ghosts don't write letters in ink. And dust doesn't make threats. The room went silent. 2 weeks later, Emily received a package at her office. No return address. Inside, a USB drive. No note. No label. They plugged it in carefully. It contained prison security footage. Dated March 11th, 2013. The video showed a hallway in cell block D of Angola prison. A guard leading an inmate into a back room. No audio. 10 minutes later, 2 guards carried that inmate out barely conscious. They cross-referenced the ID. It was Terrence Langley. The logs for that day listed only minor altercation, no injuries. They had proof of a cover-up now, but they needed more. Emily called a contact in the public defender's office. They connected her with a former prison nurse retired last year, living in Texas. They drove out to meet her. Her name was Marlene Sanders. Kind eyes, trembling hands. She remembered Terrence. He came in with cracked ribs. Said he slipped. But I knew better. He was terrified. Did you report it? She looked down. I did. But the report disappeared. Just gone. They told me to stop asking questions. Malcolm leaned forward. Would you testify? She nodded. If it helps that boy, yes. January 2023. Malcolm and Emily filed a petition for judicial review in Terrence's case. New evidence, medical, witnesses, video footage. The state tried to block it. Filed a motion to dismiss, said the statute of limitations had expired. But the judge allowed it. The hearing was set for March. Malcolm visited Terrence in prison for the first time. Glass wall. Phone to ear. Terrence looked older than his age, tired, quiet. Malcolm said, "We're fighting for you." Terrence stared back. "You sure that's safe?" Malcolm smiled, slow and steady. "Nothing about this is safe, but it's right." Terrence exhaled like he hadn't breathed in months. That night, Malcolm stood at a candlelight vigil outside the courthouse. Exonerees, activists, families, holding signs. Justice delayed is justice denied. Truth doesn't expire. Free Terrence Langley. Malcolm took the mic. He didn't raise his voice, didn't shout, just spoke clear and calm. We talk a lot about second chances in this country, but second chances require first accountability. You can't heal a wound while pretending it's not there. He paused. I got out. I was lucky. But freedom is not justice. Not until the system that stole my time pays for what it cost. March 14, 2023. Baton Rouge District Court. The courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken. Family members, law students, journalists, even a few state legislators. Outside, a crowd had gathered around TV trucks and protest signs. Inside, Malcolm sat behind the defense table, just a few feet from Terrence Langley. Terrence looked smaller than his story. He wore a borrowed suit, hands folded, eyes scanning the room like he expected someone to tell him it was all a setup. Malcolm leaned in. You ready? Terrence gave a slow nod. Don't know if I believe this is real, but I'm here. The prosecutor was a new face, young, polished, brought in after public outcry over the original DA's handling of the case. He opened with a line that made the room buzz. This hearing is not about guilt or innocence, it's about whether we are willing to correct a mistake. When the truth finally catches up, Malcolm watched his expression closely. He wasn't here to destroy anyone. He was here to shift the gravity. The judge entered, an older, black woman named Judge Irene Holloway, known for her stern tone and piercing questions. She looked over the room and said, "Let's be clear, this court does not operate in the business of erasing the past. But if that past was built on lies, then we damn sure won't protect it either." That was the moment everyone knew. This wasn't going to be swept under the rug. The first witness was Marlene Sanders, the retired nurse. She took the stand, voice trembling at first, but steady when it mattered. "I treated Mr. Langley for internal injuries in March of 2013. He said he slipped, but I've seen beatings before, the kind that come from fists, not falls." The state asked, "Did you document this?" "I did. Do you have the report?" She held up a printed copy. "This one never made it into the system because the first one disappeared." Then came the bombshell. Emily presented the USB footage, the hallway video showing Terrence being dragged half-conscious by two guards. It played in total silence. The prosecutor didn't even object, because what could he say? The judge simply nodded and said, "Let the record reflect that this footage was not part of any official investigation." Malcolm was next. He wasn't a lawyer, but he took the stand as an expert in lived experience. He described how evidence was buried in his own case, how Detective Loring's name had come up again and again, how the justice system rarely admits its own errors unless someone forces it to. And he ended with this. Terrence Langley wrote letters. He begged someone to listen. The system threw those letters away. And now we're here not because justice works, but because enough of us refused to let it die in silence. After 2 hours of testimony, Judge Holloway recessed for lunch. Outside, the crowd had grown, over 300 people now, holding signs, chanting, live streaming. Some wore t-shirts that said, "Second chances aren't just for the lucky." Malcolm stood near the stairs, hands in his pockets, watching the people. One woman approached. Her son had been arrested last year for a robbery he didn't commit. He was still awaiting trial, she said. "Even if nothing changes today, thank you. You made people look." The hearing resumed. The final hour was mostly procedural, confirming the legitimacy of the new evidence, questioning the chain of custody, verifying documents. Then it was time. Judge Holloway cleared her throat and looked directly at Terrence. "Mr. Langley, you've spent 11 years behind bars for a conviction this court no longer considers reliable. You are hereby ordered to be released immediately pending formal dismissal of all charges." A beat of silence. Then chaos. People clapping, crying, shouting. Some jumped to their feet. Terrence didn't move at first. He just sat there, stunned. Then Malcolm grabbed his shoulder, and Terrence broke into tears. The kind of tears that come from years of silence being shattered in 1 second. That night, the story led every local newscast. Wrongfully convicted man freed after 11 years, key evidence suppressed by prison officials. Cable networks picked it up the next day. CNN, MSNBC, even a brief clip on Fox News. Malcolm gave 3 interviews each time. He said the same thing. This wasn't a win. It was a correction. and we're just getting started. The next week, Malcolm sat in front of the State Oversight Committee, this time not as a guest but as an official advisor. They wanted him to help design a framework for identifying at-risk convictions, a system to flag corruption and prevent cover-ups before they happened. The irony wasn't lost on him. They were asking the man they once locked away to help fix the locks, and he said yes. Spring turned to summer. Malcolm moved into a small house on the edge of town. Terrence stayed with him for a while until he found his own place. They worked together at the Southern Justice Initiative, two men once buried by silence, now turning their stories into strategy. One night, Malcolm sat alone in his kitchen. A photo of his younger self hung on the fridge. Prison ID, shaved head, hollow eyes. Next to it, a new photo, him and Terrence, arms around each other at the Capitol steps, smiling like the war didn't break them. He took a breath. For the first time in years, the silence in the room didn't feel like a cell. It felt like peace. The end.